Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Shao Kahn. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're glad that you're all here. We're thrilled to have you in this panel, and we're excited to see what's going to happen here. We have today Life and Death Game Publishing with the Kevin Stollard and the Andrew Greenberg. I'm really excited to hear what valuable information, but first of all, why should we even care what you have to say? We'll start with you, Kevin.
Oh, well.
Since you asked so nicely.
I mean, been responsible for $27 billion worth of game franchises, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Candy Crush, which is the big earner. Basically, I am, as Director of Security Architecture, I'm part of the apparatus known as the man that people who actually work for a living have to fight.
And I've been fighting the man for years. I am Andrew Greenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Game Developers Association. I'm also a Director at Holistic Design Incorporated. The indie studio, we've been around since '95. We've got a lot of games up on GOG that you should definitely check out. Battles of Destiny, Machiavelli the Prince, Hammer of the Gods, Emperor of the Fading Suns. And on Monday, we should be having a very special live stream of our Warhammer 40K Final Liberation with GOG streamer Ash Said Hi. So make sure to tune into that. And with the Georgia Game Developers Association, there are about 200 studios now around the state making games, some of them very large, some of them smaller, but all making incredible things, working with them and helping them succeed on their story. So I've learned a lot from our own issues with publishers, and thankfully I hope that I've learned from other people's issues with publishers.
All right, and I am Devon Williams. I'm your moderator and a voice actor, and I don't have anything else valuable to contribute to this. So why don't we begin with what you guys have to speak about today?
Yeah,
Let's go ahead. All right, I'll fire at you first. So, when you're an indie studio and you're looking to work at a publisher, it can seem like this monolithic black box where you're sure that everything inside is structured and rigid and regimented. They know exactly what they want. They know exactly how they're going to try and screw you over. And but it does seem like it is this monolithic culture where everything is understood and everything is formulated in advance, and they formulaic as well. They know exactly what they want to accomplish. They know exactly which games they're going to want to do, and you're coming at them with this game you think is going to be incredible for their fourth quarter, and you have no idea what you need to be telling them. What are some of the things publishers are looking for when they look at outside titles?
Those things would look an awful lot like dollar signs. They want more dollar signs coming in than they have going out. The way I describe it to a lot of people who don't work in video gaming is if you look at an org chart of your average software company, imagine that there's a line, and below the line you have artists and creatives and people who make video games who are passionate about what they do, and they really approach it as an art. And above that line are people in the corporate hierarchy who is, how much money are you going to make me in Q4? How much is it going to cost me to make that money? And those above the line and below the line don't always get along or see eye to eye, because art is kind of a spare no expense endeavor. If an artist says it's going to cost me, $10 million to make this game, that's not a negotiable number. And you say that to somebody in the corporate world, and they go, well, how can we get that 10 million down to 3 million? And that's the genesis of the conflict. It's not, I was going to say it's not always about the money, but yeah, it's always about the money. Video games are expensive, and the bigger and more ambitious the title, the bigger and more expensive it is, and you have people running businesses who want cost certainty. They want to know what they're spending. They want to know what they can expect to receive. And games fundamentally don't work that way. You don't know that, for example, Diablo 4 is going to make $650 million in its first 5 days of launch. You don't know that, especially in the 10 years it took to design the game. Some games go viral and they make more money than you could possibly imagine. I mean, your average mobile game, the cost to make is extremely low. And then you get something like Candy Crush, it's pulling in millions of dollars a day 15 years later. kind of an anathema to people who come from the corporate world. I spent 36 years in the IT industry, and working for a lot of companies, they're very much, they want to know their numbers in advance, and they want people to be able to tell the future. And video gaming especially is the antithesis of that. You can't predict.
All right, so an indie studio is making a game. Obviously, they have the passion, they have the love for it, and they're absolutely sure it's going to make bank. I mean, there's no way it's going to fail. Now, let's say they've got a track record of 100,000 sales over their time. They've done some things already, but this is definitely the million seller that they're going to do. They've got the beautiful art, they've got the great story, they've got a small community already supporting them. And they're going to come to the publisher for some seven-figure budget to make this happen and talk about the marketing support and all those sorts of things. So they have their demo, amazingly. They've actually got a demo to show off. It's playable, it's fun. But inside the company, what are the considerations? What goes into the calculation at the publisher? The indie game studio's calculation is we have a working game we know is fun. We have a budget we strongly believe is achievable. We have a small community that is going to support this when it comes out. But what does the company, what does the publisher want to know? Obviously, one of the big things we always saw back in the day was if they had a hole in Q4, they want to know that game would come out in Q4 so that they wouldn't have that hole for their investors to yell at them about. But what are some of the other things? What else is going on?
You hit upon a big one. Especially when you get to shipping deadlines and things like that, it's like, oh, we need this game to be our tentpole for Q4. And then you find a show-stopping bug 3 weeks before release, and, well, now it's going to be another month. Software development, that happens. But when I said before about money and cost certainty, part of that cost certainty is I know I'm going to have a big release in Q4 that's going to make my financials look good. What's a nice way of saying it?
Mitigations that they want? Is it the people involved? They want to make sure you've got somebody who's delivered before?
Well, you spoke about track record, and I'm glad you did, because thinking like a corporate type, I'm going to look at the games you've released before, and I'm going to go, okay, you've averaged 100,000 players, you've averaged this amount of revenue. I'm expecting this game to fall in line with the average. I'm not going to expect your curve to go bump, 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 bam. I'm expecting to stay on this line. So when you're saying I'm expecting a million seller, that's great. You're confident in your game. Outstanding. Realistically, I'm thinking that number's, if you're wildly successful, I'll say 250,000. If you're averaging 100,000, you hit 250, that's a pretty dang good increase, and I'd be happy with that. But I'm not going to give you a budget for a million seller because you don't have the track record to show that. And again, that's that fundamental difference between the artist and the business types is I'm going off prior performance and reasonable expectations. You're going off, this is a great game. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's how we see the world. Classic example, look at Star Citizen. Ooh, sorry.
I wish I could look at Star Citizen.
But I mean, when that Kickstarter campaign went live, Chris Roberts goes out there, and he's the guy that did Wing Commander. He's the guy that did Privateer. He's Hollywood blockbuster. This guy's got all the credentials in the world. We know he makes great games, and he's promising the most ambitious, the most this, the most that. Well, that was what, 2008, I think. If I were a publisher backing his project for the, was it 300 million he's raised?
And then some, yep.
God, I wish I had that budget. There is no publishing company in the world that would have given him that much money without saying, okay, whatever you've got, ship it. Whatever you've got, it's got to leave the door right now. We'll patch it after it goes live. But you have, at some point, they're going to draw a line and say, you must ship this in Q4 or Q1 or whatever. They're not going to give you another year of slip and then another year of slip. And then another. At some point, they'll just pull the plug on it and go, nope, we're not sinking more money into this.
Now, I love that. This actually brings up a point for me I want to follow up with you. And then it leads right into my next question, which continues with Wing Commander. So And now that I've got that preamble, I forgot what my big point was going to be. What was the last thing you said again? So yeah, so it's very funny with a number of shipping before it was ready, getting your kid off to school when it's 5. With a number of my games, I had the luck of working with good strategy game publishers. So I work with New World. Our Hammer of the Gods shipped with them. And of course, they did Heroes of Might and Magic. We did Machiavelli the Prince with Sid Meier's over at Microprose back in the day. We did Warhammer 40K Final Liberation with SSI, an amazing house. One of our games, Emperor of the Fading Suns, which is actually the one that still has the biggest fan base, continuing fan base, loving it and so forth. We actually did with Sega Soft, because originally with Microprose, and then they got bought by Spectrum Holobyte, and a lot of external projects got killed. So we went to Sega Soft, which had never done a strategy game and was just starting to do PC games. So it was a whole different experience, and they needed it out the door, whereas with these other studios, we knew we'd have the testing and all the resources we need to get a strategy game out right. It was very interesting dealing with a publisher that didn't have that experience. So you want to know your publisher's expertise as well as an indie. Let's talk about the Wing Commander story he brought up. Now, Wing Commander itself was the first $1 million game dev budget. And I remember as being a game dev back then saying, $1 million? What are they going to spend $1 million on? How could you possibly spend $1 million on a game? So, so I'm coming to you with my budget. I'm saying all we need is $1 million. I mean, you can sell this game for $40. You can make this money back in no time. So what costs are the publisher continuing when I say there's $1 million budget?
$500,000 budget? What do you need $250,000 for? We could do this game on $100,000. Oh God, how do I answer that question seriously?
What are the costs that a publisher is considering? The indie only sees it's $1 million budget that I'm getting from you. What is the publisher going to spend above and beyond that?
Well, the first things you come in, advertising budget, promotion, how are you going to get the game out the door? The what part of it I'm less familiar with, because this is a relatively newer trend. When you talk about live service games, it's, you know, it used to be you paid $60, you got your box, you went home, you had your game. Not anymore. Now you buy the game. Now are you doing DLCs? Are you doing live service? Are you doing patches? How much is your maintenance team? How much are your support costs? How much does it cost to keep operating this game? That's the bad news. The good news is you have revenue rolling in constantly through microtransactions and DLC and other things. And so, you know, we've obviously been able to make it work, but it's not just what it takes to make the game anymore. It's what it takes to operate the game. And that, here's a challenge for you if you're up for it. Go into your favorite Blizzard title. And yes, I'm picking on Blizzard. Go into your favorite Blizzard title and then read the credits and look at the developers and the people who make the game. If that credit roll is less than 5 minutes, you have it on fast forward. It's massive. It takes a lot of people working support, live service, operations, all that stuff to make a game continue to fly. The backing up for a second, the way I got into the game industry this latest go around was through information security, through my background as a security professional. That was not something games ever had to consider before. You know, it's like, oh, we have a live service, we have game servers we have to protect and maintain, and bad guys are constantly trying to get in. We have assets that they can go after. Whereas 20 years ago, it's, here's the box, we're done. If you protect the source code, you've protected pretty much everything you need to protect. Different world now. So, you know, short answer to your question is ongoing support costs, what it takes to keep the game running.
Yeah, excellent. So back in the day, before live games, when we were putting them in a box and shipping them, the general calculation was we had our budget. We wanted the marketing budget to be about the same as our budget, at least, if not more. And then the publishers, as a rule of thumb, and just as a rule of thumb, they would have their own internal spreadsheets to look at this, would estimate that a quarter of our budget is what they would pay internally for tests, sending folks out to visit us, et cetera. So if we had $203,000 budget, the idea was that a quarter of that is at least what their internal, how they would do the internal breakdown. Now, with live service games, I have no idea what that breakdown is. And unless you're a recent Sega live game that got, or not Sega, a recent Sony live game that got surprisingly axed. Yep. So, yeah, too soon for everybody. Too soon for the industry, talking about that one. But, yeah, so for an indie, you have to think about all these other calculations that the publisher is having. What are the other expenses that will be generated by this? Your $1 million budget is not the extent of it. Now, the interesting thing, you were talking about the budgets now and how big those credits are. I was on a panel at DragonCon with another, this is actually a conversation after our panel. So I'm sneaking things out of class. We were talking about how Microsoft generally, you're not going to see them doing anything under a $30 million budget now for any of the games that are the Xbox developers and so forth. So it's fascinating thinking about that as the budget for the external team and then what their budget is internally for that. So, and obviously Microsoft has some nice economies of scale since they have their own internal incredible IT and security group that can be spread out between the folks. But yeah, as an indie, you do want to think what else is the publisher going to be spending to make this happen and make sure they equal your budget in their marketing at least and figure out how intelligently that can be spent. So let's talk about marketing because that's often the area where indies most hate their publishers. And I've had publishers who sent me apology letters for how bad the marketing campaigns were after they went out. How can an indie effectively interface with all the different aspects of the publisher they have to deal with? You've got to deal with your advanced producer and your producer, and you hope that's a really good relationship because that really is your main liaison into the company. You've got to interact with QA and all levels of QA. The QA manager is going to set up your QA plan, and then the actual testers themselves, some who may be really good, some who may be utterly clueless, but you're dealing with all of them all the same. Any thoughts on effective ways for an indie to communicate with a publisher, or how, if you want to flip it around, what are some good ways for publishers to interact with and communicate with developers?
Oh, wow. So actually, I'm going to break out the first part of what you were talking about before we get to that. When you talk about marketing specifically, the rise of streaming, your online influencers reaching out to your streamer communities is enormous. You get somebody like Asmongold or RaxNRX or somebody who's got a couple 100,000 followers, and they say, hey, I like this game. It's a lot of fun, and it's cheap. Go download it on Steam or whatever. You'll see a spike. Because if a streamer's got a big enough following and they say, hey, I like this game, you should go try it, people are going to go try it. And I'm picking on Twitch because that just happens to be what I watch the most, but you can see that there is clearly a lot of people willing to spend money on games. The influencers definitely have an impact on the bottom line. So if I am marketing, if I am a publisher, having a stable or a list of well-known online streamers who have access to my early titles, who can create that influence, and I can tell you Activision Blizzard surely does this. They have they do these Twitch drops, and they have, if you watch one of our list of streamers, and the streamers get more subscribers out of it, they make money. The game publisher gets eyeballs on the product, and they get basically, I don't want to say free advertising because it's not free, but it's certainly cheaper than going out and buying a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl. I would definitely go with a publisher who has a strong presence in the social media and the streaming sphere. I think that is essential. I'm just trying to go to the second part of that question. You were saying,
how can the developer communicate effectively with the... Well, actually, I like the way you switched it. What are things the developer should be taking into consideration when looking at a publisher? And you just hit a great one on the head.
Right. It's like, you know, if a game developer, indie, comes to me and saying, we've got a game, we need a publisher, and the publisher says, well, I've got this stable of influencers, I've got, this does not currently exist, but let's say I'm, Acme Publishing, and I go, we have AcmeCon every year where we show off all of our products, and we have, 50,000 people come to our event every year where we can show off all the games in our family. That, now you're encouraging community. Now you've got free advertising. Now you've got fan service events. You have got marketing things that will keep your game alive well past the publishing date. And you know this as well as I do. The one thing that's going to keep a game alive for the long haul is a strong community. If there's a good community of players that are playing your game for a long time, you know, EverQuest is still online. 25 years later?
Still getting ads.
And WoW just hit its 20th anniversary. They have a strong community. Hell, even Star Citizen has a con and a community, and the game hasn't even launched yet. Sorry. I know a lot of guys. Ben Lesnick, I love you. I'm sorry, but I got to pick on you. But that's just it, having a publisher who gets that. I think when you look at some of the new players in the game, and I'm not calling Microsoft a new player in the game, but a lot of the larger, the EAs, the Microsofts, don't have that same sense of community outreach. If I were an indie studio I wouldn't go to somebody like EA, to be honest. And no criticism to them as a company. I've never worked for them. I don't know. But show me your streamer, show me your community management, show me EACon, show me what you do. Do you go to conventions? Do you go to PAX? Do you go to DragonCon? Do you go to all these different events? Do you have a community that will play any game you publish? Because if you have that built-in community, you got 100,000 purchases right off the bat. That's exactly what I want to fund an indie developer.
Yeah, talking old school, that was the old Sierra way. Sierra had a wide variety of games, but Sierra players would play anything Sierra put out, and that was a lot of fun to enjoy. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what you're looking for in a publisher. We've talked a little bit about what publishers are looking for in the indies. So let's say the marriage actually gets made. The indie is now with the publisher. Kevin's already brought up some great ideas of like convention support and things like that. Where do you think are some of the ways the two can work together? Convention support might be a great example of that. I remember making sure my my E3 demo was in the schedule, was a paid-for deliverable, and we brought on out there. So how's some ways they can work together?
As soon as the ink is dry, I own your soul now. Too easy. Right, there you go. I think it's one of the things you have to be careful of with a publisher-studio relationship is when the publisher gets a little too hands-on. You know, when they say, hey, I want to do an expansion for this game, or I want to do live service, I want to do this thing, and it's going to take me 6 months and X amount of budget. And they go, well, how about 3 months and half that budget? Like they opened up the checkbook to get you in the door. And now that they've got you, well, we're going to walk it back a little bit. We're going to try to make that money back. Got to be careful. So track record matters. Personal relationships matter. If I had $1 for every time, you hear stories about Mike Morheim and Bobby Kotick going to war with one another. You don't want that. You want business that understands gaming well enough that they are comfortable saying, I'm going to back off and let gaming do the magic that it does. But at the same time, the responsibility on the gaming studios, you got to understand you're in a business relationship now. People got to make money. So there is a line you have to walk. You can't just be on one side. That said, the few studio acquisitions that I've been part of, both in and out of gaming, it's all fun and games for about the first 6 to 18 months. And then the acquiring company's like, okay, now where's my money? And that's when you'll see layoffs and other kinds of things. So being able to see on the other side of the line, I think, is a huge quality that I think both sides need.
Well, let's talk about that structure then. I think that's a great area to bring up. That again, indies, for many indies, this is a black box. You know you're a producer, and you know there's somebody way over them, but it's not just that. You already talked about the org chart. A producer at a smaller publisher back in the day like SSI, the executive producer had a lot of power, but on the other hand, at larger companies, there's a much more rigid structure in place. So the indie is going to deal most with the producer over that, perhaps head of the game studio, and then you're getting into the C-level folks. What is some of that corporate structure that's going to be between the producer and that CEO at the top? And all these folks are going to have the head of QA manager is going to have input into this, head of marketing, and it's not just the CMO, the chief marketing officer. It's going to be folks all along the way. Who are some of these people other than the producer who are going to have say into how this whole relationship is going to work?
Oh, goodness. Because now you're talking about finance, you're talking about legal, and the answer is there is no answer. Without getting too much into the secret sauce with the Microsoft Activision Blizzard situation, which I was recently a part of, there are some things that work very well as shared services. IT, for example. If I'm a publisher and I have a giant data center, why would you as a studio pay for your own data center for live service? And if you're going to use those shared services, now you got IT, you've got security, and what does that mean financially? Because running a data center isn't free. So what does that do to your costs? There are some, in determining what functions are best as shared services and which ones belong in the studios proper is an inexact science at best. For example, Blizzard has their own HR people, they have their own marketing team, they have their own, a lot of things that Microsoft and Xbox could do very well. But determining where you draw that line and what you do with those people, they're the very real costs that you just can't turn on a dime, and the bigger you are, the harder it is to steer and maneuver that ship. Given the current, how do I say this? Given the current regulatory environment where we weren't sure the Microsoft deal was going to happen until it happened, there's only so much pre-planning you can do. So it's, when I say that 6 to 18 months, a lot of that is spent, okay, what makes sense to go into a shared service environment and telling the studios, this is not your problem. You ship the code, it'll run on, as long as it runs on our platform, we'll handle it from there. And allow those studios to focus on what they do best, I think is the most cost-effective option. What most frequently happens is you'll see a publisher acquire a studio, and they'll say, do everything you were doing before, just come talk to us about money. And there are no shared services. Well, then there's no economy of scale. And at that point, what's the publisher doing for you other than marketing? So there's no one answer to that question.
Yeah, and there definitely are a lot of areas to be considered all along the way. That's a great way to look at what they can provide. And certainly the one thing you never let the publisher provide is the legal services. The contract is not a final thing. You can always have your lawyer go to that contract and negotiate. You always should, because contracts are drawn up for the publishers, so make sure you have a chance to go back and forth with it. Make sure there are terms under which you get everything back. There are certain rights that will be given up. Some, if you're lucky, it's just they'll get an exclusive distribution right, or maybe even a non-exclusive distribution right. The difference between those means either Kevin Inc. has the only person who can do it, that's called the exclusive license, or the non-exclusive license. Kevin Inc. has rights to distribute it at Shao Kahn and in Ireland, and I can sell other rights to other places.
I was going to use an analog in the movie industry, Kevin Smith in the movie Dogma. Harvey Weinstein had the distribution rights to that movie for, 20 years? Which is why you did not see it on TV. You couldn't get it anywhere. And Kevin Smith had to fight tooth and nail to get those rights back. That is a very real thing in the video gaming industry. And and I do not know the relationship between Microsoft's lawyers and Blizzard's lawyers, but I'll use them as an example. If I'm Blizzard and I'm working with Microsoft and I know Microsoft's got their legal team and they're drawing up all these contracts, you better believe I'm hanging on to my legal guys that are on my payroll, because while I may like your lawyers, I love mine.
No, that's absolutely a great point. And in fact, so that's why most of our HCI ancient games from the 90s are back out there, because our lawyer, very smart guy, had terms in there whereby we would get the rights back. And even with Warhammer 40K Final Liberation, where obviously we couldn't own the IP, we owned our engine. So when that game went back up on the market, we continued to draw royalties from it accordingly. The only games we don't have that, things like Multi-Tycoon with Take-Two, where it's just an issue of getting Take-Two to even acknowledge that that game still exists and try and get things going. So make sure you have those kind of terms in there, because the publisher will have the terms under which they can do what they want to do, and you want to have the terms under which you get them back. You will probably also want in that contract what services you do expect out of the publisher, including things like QA, exactly what the distribution means, exactly what localization means, and what kind of localization they'll be doing. That's a translation plus plus. It's more than just translating to another language. It's translating it effectively into another language.
It's got to deliver the same emotional punch in Polish as it does in English. And I think a challenge for the indie developer, and I wrote games 30 years ago, but a challenge is the guy who's a good video game developer doesn't know what he doesn't know about business. They don't know about marketing. They don't know about legal. They don't know about finance. That's not what they spent their time in school learning. They learned how to do computer graphics and game design. It's a very... You can't be a specialist in everything. So somebody who is a specialist in game design is necessarily going to be lacking in the business side of the equation. I have worked with a half dozen startups in my own businesses where I knew the product, but I needed a business guy to fill in the gaps in my knowledge so that if we were going to go public or if we were going to sell this company off, we were going to get a fair deal out of it. One of the examples I use from my early days, I worked for a company called Internet Security Systems. And the story was that Chris Klaus, the guy that founded the company, wrote a product that was eventually going to be Internet Scanner. And NASA looked at this product and said, that's pretty neat. We'd like to buy Internet Scanner. How much does it cost? And he goes, oh, $50, $100. And Tom Noonan, who the business guy, comes in and goes, wait. This is the government. You need to do a licensing thing and this and then Chris's eyes glaze over. But when that first $1 million check hit, he basically said, okay, Tom, you build the business, I'll build the product, go. And that's the model I've tried to do in my startups and my small companies is I'll have the idea, I can start getting the patent, but I need a business guy to take that company where it needs to go, where I can actually sell and market the product effectively, not unlike the relationship between an indie studio and a publisher. If you're smart and you've been in the business for a while, you'll learn how the other half works, and so you'll know enough to ask the right questions. But don't hold yourself to the standard of being an expert in publishing if you're a guy who works in Unreal Engine. That's a different skill set.
I think the Chris Klaus example is a great one for how you need to level up your expertise in all these. The more versed you become in these other areas, the better it'll be. Chris is, of course, now the chairman of the GGDA, and his CreateX accelerator at Georgia Tech is an amazing tool for people building their companies there. So I think this is a perfect example that Kevin brought up, that you will find that there are areas you don't understand, but you want to understand them well enough not to get burned by them, and perhaps also to help other people down the line with these areas too. So, yeah.
And that's where networking and conferences and things like this come in handy. If I had an idea for a game, Andrew would be one of the first guys to say, I got this idea, what do you think about blah, blah, blah. Having that personal Rolodex, I know, what's a Rolodex, right? Your personal contact list, address book, whatever you want to call it. But having that network of people you can contact and say, I don't have this skill, but I know someone who does, is the most valuable thing you will own over the course of your professional life.
That's a great point. The networking is absolutely important, and how you handle that network. So I'll tell another fun publisher story. After Doom had been successful, and we're starting to see these great games coming out, we had General Electric, GE, decided they were going to have a games department. And they sent the GE games guy out to talk to us, who was clearly not out of games. And shortly after he got off the plane and started talking to us, was having great fun regaling us with a story of how he just screwed over the last indie game developer he'd visited. And it was pretty clear that was not a relationship we'd be pursuing. And GE Games is not one you remember at all, though obviously GE had considerable resources in the 90s they could have put into pursuing this path. So those relationships are important to create and important to support, and not not screw over and have the words get around.
So wasn't GE, didn't they own NBC at one point? I keep remember David Letterman making all those references to GE. What was...
He had more money than God.
Yeah.
Less sense.
And less sense. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you know the business they're about to get into. But I was trying to think of the studio where it was a small studio. The publisher was looking to get into movies and entertainment, and they were short shrifting the video game studio, and then all the developers in unison quit.
It was a fair number of them.
Yeah, but I mean, there's one that happened like a month ago.
Oh, a month ago.
Or a month or two ago. Right.
Just like I blanked on the Sony match.
That's it. If somebody tells you who they are, believe them. If they're telling you stories about how they screwed over other people, they're going to do it to you. And really, at the end of the day, trust is all you got. If you're good to your word and you honor your deals and you do what you say you're going to do, people will want to do business with you. You will get hurt because there are unscrupulous people out there. But in the long run, it is a far better thing to be the guy who's reliable and you can count on, if unspectacular. If somebody came to me and said, hey, the last 10 games I've published sold 100,000 copies, I think this one's going to sell 100,000 copies, I have a much more favorable disposition toward that than somebody says, well, you know, I've published 2 or 3 games that have done 50,000 copies, but this one's going to sell 1 million. I can feel it. Okay, no. So yeah, trust and being able to know when somebody's trying to sell you a bill of goods, because there are people like that in this world. You have to make sure it's a good fit for you, and don't be enamored with somebody waving a large stack of money in your way. He says, as we were talking earlier about a certain somebody who's throwing a lot of money into the industry, but at the same time, they're throwing a lot of money in the industry, but they're letting the studios be who they are. So far, it's been money well spent. I'm not naming names because, you know, that could get me in more trouble than I'm already going to be in.
Well, let's continue with this idea of people, because while companies are not people, there are people who make up the companies. And those people change, the people you're dealing with change over time, and that creates a whole different situation that you weren't ready for. Corporate maneuverings suddenly have someone else being your direct report, and things change within the company. And it'd be very hard as an outside developer to parse this, to understand it. And the producers might communicate some of this, but often it'll be the clues you're getting from elsewhere, the lack of communication, suddenly being ghosted, suddenly from other folks within the company, seeing that your contact there, suddenly the email bounces and you weren't ready for that, and then suddenly you're having to deal with somebody else. What are some internal clues that an indie can look for? What are some of the things they should be looking out for, that things are changing at a publisher? I'll always use that when you get a surprise bounce email that you weren't expecting. That's a good sign that there are changes going on that might not be, if they weren't told you in advance, hey, you're going to have a new marketing person to talk to, that there are concerns to look out for. What are some other things that indies should look out for?
Again, not naming the publisher, but I think you can figure out who I'm about to talk about. If you see things like such and such company announces disappointing earnings, guys, pay attention to earnings calls, because if the mothership is saying things like, hey, we had a disappointing Q3, expect some blowback from that. It may not be your fault. You may have nothing to do with it, but you're going to see your sources of funding magically dry up. If there's a change in leadership at the top, you know, when Bobby left Activision Blizzard, we knew who the replacement was coming in, but if you don't know who the new guy is or what their management style is going to be like or what their expectations are going to be, which is a big problem that happened during the Microsoft acquisition, what are they going to expect of us? What are they going to do? What are they going to come in and ask of us? There was a lot of uncertainty that rattled a lot of people because we didn't know what was coming next. So my message to publishers and to these large companies is provide that sense of certainty. This is what we're expecting. We're going to stay the course for 12 to 18 months, and we're going to migrate, not, hey, we just bought you, and now it's a new day, and everything you knew in life is going to change. That will scare the hell out of people, and scared people start hanging around on LinkedIn all day.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point. Scared people will start spreading the scared, so be ready for that. So now it's interesting, and a great point Kevin brought up. Keep cued in to what the publishers are doing. I wish we could have had Google alerts back in the 90s for these things. If you don't have a Google alert up for your publisher and skim it daily, you're making a mistake. Because not only is it time for their problems, it's showing you opportunities. Hey, they did this successfully with another game. They should be doing that for your game. So skim those Google alerts for your publishers. Now let's flip the equation. There's sometimes that a studio's having problems. They don't want to tell the publisher. They don't want to risk that check because if those checks disappear, they have real problems. But publishers are keeping an eye out for problems. What are some of the things a publisher would be keeping an eye out? Obviously, we already talked about personnel changes. That's good, but let's see what else.
Well, you knew I was going to say money right off the bat. That's one thing. But the other part of it is I would pay, there are some key performance indicators, sorry, KPIs, I have to do it, that I would look for as a publisher. I want to know what your employee turnover is like. If you have a bunch of job openings that you haven't filled, why? If you have a bunch of people that are leaving the company, why? What and how stable is your culture? I would look at social media and how people in the world are talking about your game. And social media is not always the most accurate barometer, but even bad conversation is better than no conversation at all. So what does your social media engagement look like? How engaged are people with your studio and with their games? Do people care? And if they don't, why not? These are all things that I could look at as somebody who's not on the inside, that I don't have to rely on, Bob in indie developer marketing going, oh yeah, everything's fine, we're good to go. Honest, no, really. If there's a game that's coming out in 3 months, where's your buzz? Where are your influencers? Is it getting mentioned on Twitch streams? Have you had a public beta? How many people played it? What was the feedback like? These are all things, data you can gather, but you have to look.
And Kevin brought up a great point with the LinkedIn. They're going to be tracking your LinkedIn. They're looking at your corporate page there, and if suddenly there are a bunch of no longer working there, as the numbers have changed dramatically, there'll definitely be questions, and they'll be reaching out to folks. If you might not have done an exit interview with the employee who left, but your publisher is likely to contact them and have an unofficial exit interview with them to see what happened. This is another reason that companies always should always try and make sure that if folks leave, it is under good terms, because somebody will be asking them questions if someone else is investing money into your company.
Glassdoor is a thing.
Right. Yep. Definitely look for the Glassdoor of your publisher too online. Go to that site and see what the employees are saying about having worked for that company. I see a list of questions actually that you had. Did you want to jump into those? We'll turn it over to you if you've got a list of questions as well. Let's give it over to you and let's see what your list of questions are.
Well, sure. I did have one. You mentioned something about how publishers are finding new ways to market themselves through conventions or through streamers. I was wondering, what do you think the future of publishers would be like if they were trying to evolve into new ways of getting their games out there for cheaper? What does that look like in the next few years?
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, the role of publishers really changed. Back in the day when we were selling our games in boxes, our goal was to make the game, do the initial testing. The publisher would do the final testing and certainly all the compatibility testing. They would be the ones to press that gold disc. They'd be the ones to do, I mean, we didn't have any streamers, so they would do all the marketing for it and all the magazines. They would print the CDs, print the jewel box covers, put them in the actual boxes, ship them to the stores, and make sure that the stores paid for them. They'd buy the end caps in the stores, so you'd see our game, you walk on in.
Don't forget product placement. I got to make sure I'm on the top shelf or on the end cap and not stuck on the bottom back in the corner.
Yep. No, that's absolutely correct. And that would be spelled out in the contract. Then we get our royalties. Our lawyer, who represented a number of Grammy-winning million-unit selling musicians, always said that our contracts are very similar to theirs, except that we actually got our royalties as opposed to the musicians. Join us for the Shao Kahn music panels later after this. Anyway, but now the role of a publisher is very much a cherry-picking list. What do you want them to do? What can they do? Some the publishers are very good for getting you into the algorithm on Steam, getting you noticed, getting you a lot of wish lists. So some you do want handling the distribution side. Some you don't. Some will handle the marketing side. Some will not. Some will handle the QA side. Some will not. I mean, there's this wide area now that you can pick and choose from. What are some of the area of the live services you were talking about? Do you want the publisher handling the live services?
Yeah, do they have a support organization? If people are going to call or email or chat or whatever in the middle of the night saying, I have a problem with my game, do you have around-the-clock support services? Because setting up that organization is not an easy feat. I was going somewhere else with that. We're talking about the... Oh, now I was thinking about the pressing CDs in jewel cases, and I was thinking that my kids, and they're both teenagers now, have never lived in a world they had a computer with a disk drive. Everything's online. And so, yeah, the role of publishing absolutely has changed. You're spot on there. But it's getting the word out, having distribution channels like the Steam influence thing, which we haven't talked enough about. Steam communities will build a game. Was it the last one that I played was Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. It was one of those, somebody says, take a look at this game. It's $8. And I go on Steam and I see, wall of text. I'm like, wow, people care about this game. Okay, I'm going to give it a shot. Which is always a joy of mine, is when I see a game that had absolutely no hype. I'm like, okay, this is a cool little game. I'm going to spend some time here. That's still a joy to me, but hopefully if the publisher is doing their job right, these games aren't a complete surprise. There's a way to find them. And especially with a good publisher, if they've got a stable of game studios and they bring quality stuff to market, that's a hell of an endorsement.
He talks about a stable of games. We got the old Chris Zukowski quote, make a horse game, because that community is fanatic. So, yeah, check out the horse games on Steam. That's been amazing. Oh, hello. Yeah, nah, we don't go to that part of Steam. Well, let's, since we have you here, Kevin, let's talk a little bit about the role that publishers can have at actual physical conventions. What can that look like? What can that mean? What are the advantages for them in going to conventions and for the indies?
I have been screaming this from the rooftops for almost 20 years. The studios and the publishers don't do enough. Because you heard me say earlier, communities build games. If you have a strong community, you'll have a strong game. Communities get together and go to conventions. There are entire guilds of players in games who they'll say, we're all going to Dragon Con this year. We're all going to PAX this year. We're all going to wherever. Part of the reason that World of Warcraft did as well as it did is it took entire groups of people away from EverQuest. It went after Legacy of Steel and Fires of Heaven and all these guilds, these high-end rating guilds, and they got chunks of community. And they had a strong base by the time they got started. if you're on the convention circuit, you're doing the PAXs, the Dragon Cons, the Nerdy Gras, Siege. Yeah, sorry, we got to throw out some love for our own shows here. DreamHack's another one, but you know the people that go there are going to be really hardcore into games. You know this is your target audience. If you go there and start community building, you know, part of the reason we got as much love on the EverQuest things we did back at DragonCon is that Sony came out and did panels with us. And you got to meet Brenlo, and you got to meet the community reps from EverQuest. And so there was a hardcore base of EQ players, there still is, that get together every year at DragonCon. Because we've had Blizzard come to DragonCon for the last several years, the World of Warcraft fandom, you know, you find a game that's got a cosplay photo shoot group, just as an example, Mass Effect. Classic example. Game's 15 years old, but there are groups of people that get together every year to cosplay their favorite characters from Mass Effect.
And they still parade in DragonCon.
It's still parading at DragonCon. Mark Meir is still a draw, and he voiced that character last, 10 years ago? But these are the people you want to go after. And if you build that relationship with the communities, then when something new comes out, they're going to give it a chance. Because now you have a track record.
Well, it's more than that. These are the evangelists. These are the ones who are going to preach your game from the rooftops and make sure everybody does know about it. These are the dedicated fans you really do want to support as best you can. So yeah, seeing these folks at DragonCon and other conventions is important. Hey, having Larry Elmore out at DragonCon when he was doing EverQuest covers, absolutely. Yep. So yeah, getting that kind of support out is a great idea. So yeah, that got us off rolling. What other questions do you have for us?
Actually, we're reaching time at the moment, so I did want to ask if you guys had any final shout-outs that you wanted to give, or if there's anywhere that we can follow you to keep getting motivated for this kind of stuff. I thought you were about to reveal, like, an awesome tattoo that, like, you had. Oh, yeah, I have to call out to my mom, my daughter. Yeah.
I'd like to take a minute. We have our own, or I say we. My friends and I have our own show called Nerdy Gras that we're running March 1st and 2nd. It's www.nerdygras.org. We're baby convention just getting off the ground. Video games and geek stuff. Seems like the right kind of mix here. But please come by and check us out, and hopefully we can build this into a community.
And if you're watching this here, you already know about our YouTube channel, Georgia Game Devs, with more than 700 videos on all aspects of game development. Also, make sure to check out ggda.org. That stands for the Georgia Game Developers Association. Subscribe to the newsletter for more notifications of events like this. And, of course, for holistic-design.com. You look for us on Steam and especially on GOG. And make sure you turn in Monday to Ash Said Hi on Twitch for our live stream of Warhammer 40K Final Liberation.